Article 29, Participation in Political and Public Life. This article begins with two comments highlighted in panels. Going ahead with a law for accessibility that has been worked on by the Access Alliance, increasing funding for the disability sector, having more disability representation, lived experience in government, survey respondent. The disappointment in the delay in the latest census results was felt deeply within the disability sector. Funding is reliant on accurate data, and the fact that the latest health survey is not going to even address learning difficulties confirms government lack of understanding of the real issues. Survey respondent. Introduction. Article 29 obliges governments to guarantee disabled people political rights and the opportunity to enjoy them on an equal basis with others. Governments must also ensure that disabled people can effectively and fully participate in political and public life. This extends to ensuring that disabled people are provided adequate opportunity and support to autonomously express their right to vote, stand for election, and, if they are elected, to hold public office roles. Additionally, this article requires the promotion of the opportunity for disabled people to engage in public affairs through working in non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and to assemble groups and organizations representing disabled people without discrimination. General comment. The right to equal participation in political and public life is a core platform of citizenship. Disabled people who seek to work as public officials should have access to reasonable accommodations to make autonomous and informed decisions, and should be given resources to enable supported participation and decision-making if required. Importance of Article 29 to disabled people in New Zealand. In order to fully recognise Article 29, it is essential that disabled people can access and participate in decision-making systems, in particular those that impact on disabled people and their communities. The visibility of disabled people at central and local government level is low, despite 24% of New Zealanders being identified as having some kind of disability in the 2013 census. End note 222. This suggests a need to provide widespread support for disabled people to fulfill the right to participate and vote. A lack of universally accessible systems for public participation is a social and political barrier. Current place of Article 29 in New Zealand law and practice. Under Section 12 of the New Zealand Bill of Rights Act 1990, disabled people are legally entitled to vote by secret ballot. However, for some disabled people, this right can be restricted. For instance, Section 81(c) of the Electoral Act 1993 disqualifies people from voting who are detained in a hospital under the Mental Health, Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Act 1992, or in a secure facility under the Intellectual Disability, Compulsory Care and Rehabilitation Act 2003, when certain other criteria also apply. These criteria relate largely to interaction with the justice system, such as being found unfit to stand trial or not guilty on the grounds of insanity, or being a person detained in a prison but for whom transfer to a hospital for specialist psychiatric care is assessed as being more suitable. These types of legislative restrictions have a disproportionate exclusionary effect on disabled people, particularly those with neurodiversity or intellectual or learning disabilities, who are overrepresented in the justice system and whose support requirements may not be well understood. Improving the accessibility of New Zealand's political and public infrastructure has been recognised as an area needing improvement with the release of the Electoral Commission's Access 2020 Disability Strategy. This strategy outlines an incremental plan for improving voting accessibility across 3 successive electoral cycles, with the intent of implementing different objectives for each cycle. Described more fully below, telephone dictation voting was introduced in 2014, and improvements to the enrolment process were made in 2017. The Electoral Commission hopes to fully roll out online voting for the 2020 electoral cycle. End note 223. Improving capacity for disabled candidates to run for office in the general election is the purpose of the Election Access Fund Bill introduced in 2018, Endnote 224. This bill would create an access fund controlled by the Electoral Commission, which non-profit organisations and registered parties could access to meet accessibility-related costs for disabled candidates. Committee's previous dialogue with the state on Article 29. The Disability Committee's 2014 concluding observation for Article 29 recommended that the government consider the introduction of accessible electronic voting to enable disabled people to cast their votes in a truly secret manner. Endnote 225. Comment on the realisation of Article 29 in New Zealand. Full participation by disabled people in political and public life has not been a key design feature of current political systems. For example, until recently, printed and paper-based voting meant visually impaired or blind voters required assistance in completing a ballot vote, which undermines the right to secrecy. Endnote 226. For disabled people to participate fully, they are heavily reliant on agencies providing information in accessible formats and/or providing reasonable accommodations to ensure there are no barriers to full participation. Such accommodations include providing voting papers in alternative formats and personal voting supports for people according to their access needs. While disabled people are extended a definitive right to vote and some improvements have been made, in practice the existing infrastructure to support this right is haphazard. In 2011, Green Party MP Mojo Mathers was elected as New Zealand's first deaf Member of Parliament. Her election raised questions about Parliament's willingness and ability to provide appropriate accommodations to Ms Mathers, including who should fund New Zealand Sign Language (NZSL) interpretation, or any other staff required to facilitate participation on an equal basis with others. Endnote 227. Further questions around the accessibility of New Zealand's political processes were raised during the 2017 election, when a petition was launched to ensure NZSL interpreters were available in televised political debates. Endnote 228. Broadcasters received complaints that deaf and hard of hearing citizens would experience delayed access to NZSL interpreted or closed captions versions of televised debates between the major party leaders. Endnote 229. Data on disabled people's representation, especially that of disabled Māori and Pacific peoples, remains unknown, with few current members of Parliament openly identifying as being disabled or having access needs since the departure of Ms Mathers in 2017. Additionally, little disaggregated data about disabled people working in central and local government is available. As part of the Electoral Commission's disability strategy, telephone dictation voting was introduced in 2014 and trialled for the general election. Endnote 230. Telephone dictation voting enabled registered voters with visual impairments to vote independently or secretly without violating the current terms of the secret ballot voting system. Recommendations. The IMM recommends that the government 99. Review the parameters for disqualification of voters subject to the Mental Health, Compulsory Assessment and Treatment Act 1992 and the Intellectual Disability, Compulsory Care and Rehabilitation Act 2003 to ensure conformity with the Disability Convention. 100. Implement legislation and other measures to increase accessibility of election processes for disabled people, co-designed with disabled people. 101. Work closely with disabled people and the Electoral Commission to ensure that information about local and general elections can be provided in accessible formats and that the necessary supports are in place to ensure that there is not a disproportionate exclusion from voting of people with an intellectual impairment. 102. Review the support for disabled candidates and electoral processes and resource and provide reasonable accommodations at both local and central government levels.